How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Plus One Architecture, a channel where we have fun with architecture and design. Now today we're going to do something a little bit different. I want to start off by wishing everyone a happy October. It's finally fall. We can enjoy bonfires, hot cocoa, apple picking, but most importantly, we get to celebrate Halloween. Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. You get to dress up, the weather gets a lot cooler, but most importantly, horror movies. Now you might be asking yourself, what do horror movies and architecture have to do with each other? Well, that's what we're going to find out today. So I picked 3 horror movies for us to check out today. Now when you guys watch this, you will hear the audio. I will not. It'd be really boring for you guys to just stare at me staring at a muted screen, so I left the audio on for you guys, but while I'm watching it, I won't hear a thing. I don't want to be influenced by the music or any of the sound effects. I just want to look at the scenes for just the visuals. So before we jump in, I'm going to give you guys 3 examples of how architecture can influence you. So in our first example, we have a hallway on the left and an open concept house on the right. Now between these 2 spaces, which one are you going to want to spend more time in? The one on the right. And that's because these spaces were designed to function this way. Hallways typically don't have a lot of natural light. They're pretty cramped, only big enough to fit about 1 or 2 people through. While the open concept space on the right is very open, it has a lot of natural light coming into it and a lot of space for people to move around. And that's because hallways were designed to be circulation spaces. Circulation space is simply just a space that we move through. So hallways, stairwells, things like that. So because of this, the hallway really isn't a great place to hang out in. It's actually where 2 creepy twins hang out all the time. It's just a space you don't want to be in. Not all circulation spaces are designed as tight, narrow, poorly lit spaces. Let's take, for example, the Art Institute of Chicago. This is a very large, bright, open space that meets all the criterias of an area that you would want to spend time in. However, it's filled with hard surfaces, meaning that there's no sound dampening or soundproofing within this space. So as you're walking through, you hear a lot of people talking, and it kind of becomes this overwhelming cacophony of echoing, and it's very overwhelming and overstimulating to the brain. So because of this, it causes you to want to walk through the space and get into the gallery areas, which is our example on the right. These areas can also be lit by natural light. However, it'll typically be diffused as to not bring damage to any of the paintings. It's quieter, they're open, and they're just a lot more enjoyable to be in. Sometimes it's not just the inside of buildings that can influence us. Other times it can be our city streets. On our left, we have the financial district in Chicago. Now this isn't an area that you typically go and hang out in. You know, there are some shops, some bars, maybe a restaurant or 2, but it's not an area that people frequent. When walking through this area, as you can see from this image, the sidewalks are a little bit wider than usual. There's still something very imposing and slightly oppressive about this area. If we look at the materiality of the buildings and the overall size and structure of them, there's a weight that seems to come down on you as you walk through. It's not much of an area that you want to take your time in. It's meant for the movers and shakers. You kind of want to get where you're going, handle your business, and move on. Now looking at our example on the right, we have Michigan Avenue across the street from Millennium Park. So one of the first things that we notice here is just the expansiveness of this street. We went from a 4-lane road, and that's including the parking spots on the left, to a 10-lane road on the right. Starting off with that, the overwhelming feeling that we had in the financial district is kind of taken away here. The expansiveness helps with that because, as you can see, the sidewalks are even a little bit wider, so there's this disconnect between pedestrians and vehicles. Not only that, we also see the introduction of more landscaping here, which kind of just gives us a more relaxed, calming feeling, whereas in the financial district, it was just all hardscape. All of these examples are just sort of baseline, tip of the iceberg type of analysis. I could go into a much deeper analysis on this topic, but due to time constraints and at running the risk of boring the crap out of you guys, I'm going to cut it there. If this is a topic that really interests you guys, I'm going to leave some links in the description down below to some articles that I found that dive much deeper into the topic of how our spaces can influence both our mental and physical health. There's also going to be a video popping up in the top right-hand corner of your screen to a TED Talk that might interest you as well. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video because I have some exciting news. Now, onto our first movie, The Boy. The boy is about a young American woman who takes a job as a nanny for an 8-year-old boy in a remote English village. To her surprise, she learns that the child to her new employers is a life-size doll. When she violates a list of strict rules, a series of disturbing events bring her worst fears to life, leading her to believe that the doll is alive. Let's take a look.
The heel shy has had to step up for a moment.
Okay, so first impressions of the house. Let me let it go forward a little bit more. So it's, I don't know if this was in post-production, or if this house really is that desaturated. But that's the first thing I kind of noticed, is there's this feeling of desaturation, this removal of color, which also indicates this removal of happiness. Typically we associate bright colors with, happy moods and whimsy, whereas this is kind of doing the exact opposite. It's giving us an unsettling feeling, the color gray, although it's, a very neutral color. It can also come off as dull or dingy, which they kind of reinforce that with leaving the scorch marks of the fire that was there previously. The railing here, you have the runoff of the rust, which is staining the stone. So it's kind of reinforcing this like dinginess to it. The color gray is also associated with loss and depression. So they're reinforcing this depression, because obviously the parents are depressed that they lost their son 20 years ago. Typically with depression, when you're experiencing and feeling depressed, you typically kind of let things go, and things that you once kept tidy or that you kept order to, you kind of let go of, which is shown here on the house. Although it is an elderly couple, they clearly come from some sort of money. They have some sort of wealthy background, so it wouldn't be much for them to charge someone to keep the house clean and proper.
Is anyone up there? Hi.
So on the inside we have these brown walls and this blue carpet. One, not the greatest color combination, but two, it's helping. So with brown being the most prominent color in this scene, it's reinforcing this feeling of depression, isolation, and like a sadness, because these are the negative emotions that come from brown. Brown is typically seen as like a natural color, and it gives us strength and stability. But on the negative side, it can evoke these other emotions.
Malcolm, if that's you, this isn't funny. Look, if somebody's up there...
So if we look behind the main character in this scene, we see some moonlight coming through what appears to be blue curtains. So this is more like a scene kind of cast in blue. Although blue, it can be calming, it's also associated with the feelings of depression and loss or sadness, which for this scene kind of makes sense. Depression wears on us, it breaks us down, it can make us feel defeated, and that's kind of what the boy is doing to our main character here. He's wearing her down. He's trying to break her in a way, so that she finally follows his rules. In the scene before this, he stole some of her stuff, and when we went into her room, all the drawers were empty and all of her things were gone from there as well, not just the bathroom. It makes sense that this scene has a blue backdrop due to him trying to, like I said, break down and create this feeling of like a hopelessness with our main character so that she finally follows his rules. So the movie goes on to have a couple more scenes that are a little unsettling. I don't want to be the guy that ruins the ending in case you guys want to watch these movies. So with that being said, let's move on to our next movie. Our second movie is When a Stranger Calls. Now this movie is about a young high school student who, during a babysitting job, receives increasingly threatening phone calls from an unknown stranger. So let's take a look. That's the Avengers guy, isn't it? Guy that has no name? Alright, so we have another house in the middle of nowhere. Very secluded, it's isolated, more of a foresty type of setting. A more contemporary style house. Looks to be a lot more open compared to our last movie. Just from the large glass windows, the feeling of being watched from outside is probably going to be a lot more present than previously, but we'll see once we actually get inside.
Hi, I'm the babysitter.
Sorry to rush, but I think we're a little...
So kind of what I assumed from the exterior of the house, this very open, exposed floor plan, I'm assuming is going to come into play later on as she begins getting the phone calls. One more thing about the color within the space. Looks like it's a beigeish yellow. Typically yellow is associated with joy, with warmth, with energy, but it also invokes frustration and anger. So that will be interesting to see how, if at all, that's utilized later on in the movie.
You don't know who I am or where I live. And Dr. Mandrakis is going to take me home as soon as he gets here. Or maybe even the police will take me home.
Okay, so we see our main character on the phone with the killer. But what's very interesting about this scene is as she's walking through the space, her emotions begin to change and influence the scene as the scene begins to influence her emotions. As she was walking up the stairs, we had like this brown background, and she kind of had more of a scared, desperate look on her face, and I assume more of a desperate sound in her voice. But as she kept going and we got to the more yellow aspects, which as I mentioned earlier can indicate anger, there's a fake confidence that came about her, so it was more of an anger through fear. And now that we're in this scene, which is a bit of like a yellow and brown, she's taking on this more aggressive, powerful stance and utilizing anger to push through this fear. And as we see this happen within her, you almost see it happen within the scene. When we see the changes between the brown, there's a little bit of blue in the beginning, and the yellows, and how they mix and influence that of our main character.
Rosa?
So with this scene here, we're getting our typical shadowy background, moving through the space slow, everything typical of a scary movie. If you look behind our main character, you can see that they have clear story windows. Now, clear story window is just simply a window that is above eye level. This is perfect for a bathroom because you have a sense of privacy, as well as being able to let natural light in. However, in this context, this is right before the classic line of, "The call is coming from inside the house." So it kind of reinforces this feeling of being trapped within. So the rest of our movie is basked in shadow, a lot of camera tricks, angles, lighting that is typical of a horror film. Not much more of the design of the setting can be really analyzed. So we'll leave this one here and move on to our next one. Hey everyone, so in my haste to get this video done and edited, I realized that I did not give you the synopsis for this movie. This film is set in a luxury tower block during the 1970s, featuring a wealth of modern conveniences. The building allows its residents to become gradually uninterested in the outside world. The infrastructure begins to fail and tensions between residents become apparent, and the building soon descends into chaos. Alright, back to it.
For all its inconveniences,
Wow. Okay. So these are a high rise for sure. It's got this like, they have these modernism kind of feel. Very straightforward, concrete glass. The windows are really small though. Probably means not a lot of sunlight in the units. I don't know. There's something unsettling about these. It's more of the kind of like repetitiveness of them. There's this feel of a want for a utopia, which in turn just becomes dystopia, ironically. Similar to, this actually reminds me of a couple of projects, which I'll get into those once we see a little bit more of these buildings. Okay, didn't even need to get that far into the movie. So, I'm assuming this is one of the units. Like I said, not much natural light getting in. You have this clear story window right there, but it creates this strange, like, shadowy area within the unit. Right underneath of it, as well as with the structure of the building. With this gigantic column that we see right in front of us, it's also creating these uncomfortable shadows down the hallway. Yeah, the higher ceilings do help alleviate some of this tightness of these gray tones, which we've previously talked about, gray being, you know, a very neutral color, but it's also depressing for the lack of, for better terminology. It just does not feel good whatsoever. Let's see if we can see a little bit more. So a couple things about the inside of this building. First thing that I noticed is it doesn't look like the gym has any sort of natural light coming into it, which, as I've mentioned before, I think I've mentioned it. If I haven't mentioned it, kind of gives us this sense of comfort. Also, knowing what time of day it is helps with our circadian rhythm. Imagine being, you know, trapped in your closet all day, or just being in a room or an office or anything like that you can't see outside, or you don't know what time of day it is. Even if there is a clock, you know, really do a lot of damage to both our physical and mental health. The other thing with this scene as well is, let's go forward a little bit. When everyone was walking outside, there's this lack of green space, of trees, grass. There's sort of this conformity in uniformity of it all. Okay, so there's a problem with wanting to create utopias because they just become dystopias. So the examples that I was talking about, one of them is, it's called the Radiant City. Sorry to all my professors if I really F this up. So the Radiant City, the main idea behind it was the human body, believe it or not. So at the core of the city, or the, you know, central part, was more of the business district, offices, things of that sort. From there it radiated out and went to the residential districts, which were high-rise buildings similar to this, that had large green spaces in between to create this comfortable feel. People can get their daily dose of fresh air. I believe on the roofs there were pools and parks, and the schools on the very top floors. In each building there was to be like its own laundromat, I believe its own grocery store, which we kind of saw here as well. The roads were very much separated from the sidewalks. So the sidewalks were raised, which allowed higher speed traffic to flow through the city. The problem with it is what we see here. It's too perfect. And there's a problem with perfection in architecture. Do we want our buildings to be built perfectly or built properly? Oh, yeah, but in a city type layout, our minds can't comprehend too much perfection. For instance, the city of Chicago, New York, things like that. These are cities that are built on grid patterns. If we're traveling through this space, our brains can comprehend this pattern. However, if it was each block looks exactly the same and is laid out the exact same way, there's a disingenuousness about it and almost an inhumanity to it, because there's perfection in imperfection. It lacks personality, and as humans we trust personality. It gives us a sense of an emotion, whereas these buildings, and as well as with the Radiant City, there is no personality. I know this is a very long tangent and I'm very sorry. Now, the project that failed that the Radiant City influenced is called Pruitt-Igoe. That was in St. Louis. Speaking of cities that you don't understand when you drive through them, St. Louis is one of them. But anyways, Pruitt-Igoe is the failed project I was talking about earlier. I'm going to try to wrap this up really quick. Built in, I believe, the late 50s or the 60s. It was built as a public housing project, but a lot of the issues with it, you know, looking at the hallways and things like that, there was an inhumanity about it. It looks like a prison. Long hallways created spaces for crime. There was a lot of racial segregation. It just became a huge shit show of a project and was eventually torn down, I believe, in the 70s. It just goes to show that things built as a utopia and too perfectly have a tendency to fail. Also, don't racially segregate. I mean, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I guess rant and tangent over. Let's get back to the movie. So this movie was a bit different than the other two, whereas the other two are your stereotypical horror films. They have their moments of, you know, fear, rising tension, things of that sort. This movie was a slow burn. Throughout the entire movie, there's this slow decay of people's humanism and a de-evolution of self, if any of that makes sense. I would definitely recommend watching this movie. It's a little bit more gory and a little more holds no punches side. So if you're not into those types of movies, then I wouldn't recommend it. So this one was weird. There was no parts that I could really analyze that were quote unquote scary. Wow, I'm not even sure how to put this. The entire movie had a sort of unsettling feeling throughout the whole thing. There were moments where in the grocery store, as the mentality and the humanity of the people began to decay, the produce was decaying slowly as well. This movie's a really interesting conversation about social hierarchy and how we kind of combine that with the human condition. So for example, there starts to be problems within the building. You know, electrical outages. It looked like the trash chutes started to clog up, which caused issues in the lower floors, whereas the upper floors, you know, received the electricity that was missing. And as those issues kept arising, the people on the higher levels kept getting special attention. However, everyone in this building are all in the same socioeconomical class. The only difference between them is what floor they're on. Because of that, the people on the higher floor had a very different complex about them than the ones on the lower floor. They felt as though they were better. You know, just reading the subtitles here and there. There was this war that began to build between the lower levels and the upper levels. With the climate that we're currently in, it's a very interesting look at things as to how just that one simple act of being on a different level than someone, how it can give you this complex and give you a sense of authority, for the lack of better words, which then if we flip that on its head, we can talk about actual socioeconomic divides and separations, but that's not what this video is about, so we can leave that for another one. But yeah, so this movie didn't really have any scary moments you could break down, and what I could analyze architecturally did in the beginning. Definitely check this movie out if you want to look at the breakdown and de-evolution of the human mind and psyche based on class structure. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this one. So, tell me everyone, are you afraid? Are you? But on a more serious note, I really hope you guys learned something new today, and I hope as you walk around in your everyday life, you pay attention to how the architecture is making you feel, or the design of the space. But anyways, the big news that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. I'm going to be going live every Monday and Wednesday starting in November. So come hang out, ask any question that you may have about architecture, whether it's the permitting process, what it takes to become licensed, or what school was like, or ask any question under the sun. It'll be every Monday and Wednesday from 12 to 4 Central Time. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button down below and be sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date on all new content. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I'm Jonathan, and this is the Plus One Architecture channel. See ya.